The metallic scrape of chairs against linoleum echoed through the briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command Coronado. 43 people, Navy SEAL candidates, support staff. Civilian contractors and officers filled the space with the casual energy of a Tuesday afternoon training session. Sunlight streamed through salt-stained windows, illuminating submarine schematics pinned to corkboards and a scale model of a Los Angeles-class attack sub perched on the instructor's desk. Then she walked in. 5'4", late 30s maybe. Civilian clothes, a plain gray blazer over a white blouse, dark slacks, flats. Brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no military bearing that anyone could see. She carried a worn leather briefcase in one hand and a travel mug in the other, moving with the unremarkable gait of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. The laughter started before she reached the podium. "You've got to be kidding me," Mason Hammer, Fletcher muttered from the third row, his 6'2" frame sprawled across two chairs. The lead SEAL candidate's voice carried across the room with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "They sent us a librarian." Snickers rippled through the SEAL section. Dylan Cowboy Carter, the youngest in the class at 25, leaned back with his boots propped on the chair in front of him. "Maybe she's here to teach us the Dewey Decimal System for submarine manuals." More laughter. The woman reached the podium, set down her briefcase with deliberate care, and clicked open the clasps. Her movements were economical, precise. She didn't look at the audience, didn't acknowledge the mockery, just pulled out a tablet, a laser pointer, and a stack of laminated cards. "Good afternoon." Her voice was quiet, steady. Midwestern accent, maybe Ohio or Indiana. "I'm Naomi Blake. I'll be covering advanced submarine operations and emergency procedures for the next 3 hours." Mason exchanged glances with Jack. Numbers Bradley, the technical specialist, sitting beside him. Jack had graduated from the Naval Academy with honors, spent 2 years on a destroyer, and considered himself an expert on naval operations. His smirk said everything about what he thought of this civilian instructor. 3 hours, Jack called out. "Ma'am, with all due respect, most of us have more sea time than you've probably got in books." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Commander Connor Stevens, the NS Stazzler's training officer overseeing the session, started to intervene from his position near the door. But Naomi Blake simply nodded as if she'd expected exactly this response. "You might be right," she said. She tapped her tablet, and the wall-mounted screen behind her illuminated with a cross-section diagram of a nuclear submarine. "Let's start with a scenario. You're on a classified insertion mission. Your SEAL delivery vehicle experiences catastrophic failure at 400 feet depth. Your submarine tender is 12 miles away. Water temperature is 38 degrees. You have approximately 90 seconds before hypothermia impairs cognitive function. What's your first action?" Silence. Then Dylan raised his hand, still grinning. "Call for help. Your communications are compromised. The SDV's antenna array was damaged in the failure. Surface in use, emergency beacon. You're in denied territory. Surfacing reveals your position to hostile radar." The grin faded. Dylan glanced at Mason, who had straightened in his seat, arms crossed. The challenge in his posture was unmistakable. "This is a trap question," Mason said. "There's no good answer in that scenario." Naomi's expression didn't change. "There's always an answer. It's just not always the one you want." She advanced the slide. New diagram, pressure tables, depth calculations, oxygen consumption rates. You have to understand your environment before you can survive it. Submarines aren't surface ships. The rules are different down there. The margins are smaller. And if you don't respect that, the ocean doesn't care how elite you think you are. The temperature in the room shifted. Not much, just enough that a few people noticed. Lieutenant Amber Reed, the communications officer seated near the back, leaned forward slightly. She'd been watching Naomi's hands, the way they moved across the tablet with familiar confidence, the unconscious adjustment of her stance that looked almost like parade rest before she caught herself and relaxed. If you're already hooked by Naomi's quiet confidence in the face of disrespect, this story is about to get wild. Every elite soldier in that room thinks they know everything about submarines, but they're about to discover they know nothing. And the woman they're mocking, she's the only person who can save them when everything goes wrong. Smash that like button and subscribe, because you won't believe where this goes next. Mason stood up, 6'2", of muscle confidence and carefully cultivated intimidation. 28 years old, 4 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars. He'd earned his place in this room, and he wasn't about to let some civilian contractor undermine him in front of his team. "Ma'am, I appreciate the hypothetical, but maybe we should get a real instructor, someone with actual operational experience. No offense, but we need to learn from people who've been there, not people who've read about it." The room went very still. This was the moment where a civilian instructor would typically deflect to the training officer or appeal to the commander, or simply fold under the pressure of a full SEAL team staring them down. Naomi Blake took a sip from her travel mug, set it down on the podium with a soft click. Then she met Mason's eyes for the first time since entering the room. "None taken," she said quietly. "You're right that reading about something isn't the same as experiencing it. So, let's move past theory." She tapped the tablet again. The screen changed to show a live submarine tracking map, real-time positions of U.S. Navy vessels in the Pacific. Several officers straightened. This was classified information not typically displayed in training sessions. "How many of you have done submarine insertions?" 15 hands went up, including Mason's. "How many have done SDV operations below 300 feet?" 8 hands remained. "How many have executed under-ice operations in Arctic conditions?" 3 hands. Mason's went down. Only Chief Henry Ironside Foster, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service, kept his hand raised. He was studying Naomi now, with different eyes, the skepticism giving way to something more cautious. "How many," Naomi continued, her voice still that same quiet register, "have commanded the vessel that got you there and brought you home?" Every hand lowered, the silence stretched. Naomi returned to her briefcase, pulled out a remote, and clicked through to the next slide. USS Ohio, Trident-class ballistic missile submarine, converted to guided missile configuration in 2006. Displacement, 18,750 tons submerged. Length, 570 feet. Complement, 155 crew members. Operational depth classified, but let's just say deeper than you'll ever dive in an SDV. Jack leaned forward, his analytical mind catching something. The Ohio was in Arctic operations 2 years ago. Classified mission. There were rumors about rumors. Naomi interrupted gently, are usually wrong, but sometimes they miss the most interesting parts. She gestured to the screen. The hardest thing about commanding a submarine isn't the technology or the tactics. It's the silence. You're responsible for 150 lives, billions of dollars in equipment and weapons that could level cities. And you do it all in absolute silence because sound is death down there. You learn to make decisions without second guessing, without hesitation, because hesitation at 800 feet depth doesn't just kill you, it kills everyone depending on you. Something in her delivery made several people shift in their seats. This wasn't textbook knowledge. The way she described the pressure, the isolation, the weight of command, it had the texture of memory. Dylan, recovering some of his confidence, raised his hand. "So you've interviewed submarine commanders, done research?" "Something like that." Naomi returned to the SDV scenario slide. "The answer to my question, by the way, is you don't surface. You don't call for help. You navigate by dead reckoning to the submarine tender's last known position, using the SDV's backup compass and your dive watch. You preserve your air by controlling your breathing and your panic. And you trust that the submarine commander tracking your mission knows enough about ocean currents and underwater topography to position the tender exactly where you'll emerge. Because if they don't, you die alone in the dark." She paused. "Questions?" No one spoke. The casual mockery from 10 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a wary attention. Even Mason, still standing, looked less certain of his ground. Naomi continued the briefing. For the next 20 minutes, she covered submarine emergency procedures with a level of technical detail that made Jack's earlier confidence look like undergraduate enthusiasm. She knew the exact pressure differentials at various depths, could recite ballast tank configurations from memory, discussed reactor cooling systems and emergency blow procedures with casual precision. When Lieutenant Junior Grade Blake Turner, the submarine liaison officer, asked about the S9G reactor's emergency scram protocols, Naomi answered with specifications that weren't in any unclassified manual. Blake caught Amber's eye across the room. Both of them were thinking the same thing. Who was this woman? The training exercise started at 1500 hours, a submarine escape simulation using the facility's vertical tank to replicate conditions at 400 feet depth. The SEAL candidates would practice emergency ascent procedures, learn to manage pressure changes, and experience the disorientation of near-zero visibility. Connor Stevens briefed the exercise parameters while Naomi set up monitoring equipment. Mason and his team geared up with the casual competence of men who'd done this 100 times. They barely glanced at the safety protocols Naomi distributed on laminated cards. "Hey, Blake," Dylan called out, holding up the card. "You put the emergency blow system on here twice. Think you might have made a mistake." Naomi looked up from her tablet. "No mistake. There are two separate emergency blow systems on a submarine, primary and backup. They're on that card twice because they're the difference between controlled ascent and explosive decompression." "Bit redundant, don't you think? Redundancy is how you survive," she gestured to the tank. "In there, you've got safety divers, warm water, and controlled pressure. Real submarine operations. No room for error. You blow the ballast wrong. You either fail to surface or you surface so fast you turn the crew into hamburger." The crude simile made a few people wince. Mason frowned. "That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" "Is it?" Naomi met his gaze. "Have you ever seen the inside of a submarine after explosive decompression? I have. It's not dramatic. It's physics." Something in her voice silenced the comeback forming on Mason's lips. A flatness almost clinical that spoke of actual experience with whatever horror she was describing. But before anyone could pursue the thread, she turned back to her equipment, and the moment passed. The exercise proceeded. SEAL candidates entered the tank in pairs, practiced emergency procedures, demonstrated competence. Naomi monitored from the control station, occasionally making notes on her tablet. She didn't correct anyone, didn't offer unsolicited advice, just watched with that same quiet attention that was starting to unnerve people. Then Jack's turn came. He descended with Dylan, both of them confident in their abilities. The simulation called for a controlled ascent from 300 feet after simulated equipment failure. Textbook procedure. Jack had done it dozens of times, but at 250 feet something went wrong. The pressure regulator on Jack's gear malfunctioned not dangerously, but enough to trigger alarms. Safety protocol required immediate surface. Jack started his ascent, but too quickly overcorrecting for the equipment issue. The ascent rate climbed 12 feet per second, 15-18. In the control room, the safety diver reached for the override, but Naomi's hand was already moving fingers, flying across the control panel with muscle memory that looked nothing like a civilian contractor. She adjusted the tank's pressure differential, slowed the ascent rate, and guided Jack to a controlled decompression stop, all in less than 3 seconds. Jack surfaced gasping but unharmed. The safety diver helped him out of the tank, while Naomi made notes on her tablet, her expression unchanged. Connor Stevens stared at the control panel, then at Naomi. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" "That manual override sequence. That's a 4-step process. It takes training and certification. You executed it like..." He stopped, studying her face. "Who are you?" "I'm the consultant hired to teach this course. Consultants don't have emergency tank control certification. That's restricted to active duty personnel with specialized training." Naomi closed her tablet. "Maybe I used to be active duty." "What branch? Does it matter?" She looked past him to where Jack was sitting on the pool deck, still catching his breath. "Your candidate is fine. That's what matters." Connor wanted to press, but the training schedule was already behind. He let it go for now, but he pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Commander Grace Hayes in Naval Intelligence. 3 words: "Check Blake background." The rest of the exercise continued without incident. Mason completed his run, flawlessly made sure everyone knew it. Dylan cracked jokes to cover his nervousness after watching Jack's near incident. Chief Foster moved through the procedures with the economical grace of long experience. And through it all, Naomi Blake watched from the control room, making notes, saying little and revealing nothing. At 1600 hours, they broke for a 15-minute rest. SEAL candidates sprawled on benches, hydrating and swapping stories. Naomi refilled her travel mug from a water fountain and checked her phone. 2 missed calls, both from the same classified number. She frowned slightly, then put the phone away without returning the calls. Amber Reed approached during the break carrying 2 bottles of water. Thought you might need this. That control room gets warm. Thanks. Naomi accepted the bottle but didn't open it. That was impressive what you did with the override. Most people freeze in emergency situations. You moved like it was muscle memory. Training helps? What kind of training? Amber kept her voice casual friendly. If you don't mind me asking, I did some submarine liaison work on the Reagan. Always curious about different career paths. Naomi smiled slightly. The kind that makes you really good at one thing and unemployable at everything else. Sounds like military. Sounds like a lot of things. Naomi glanced at her watch, a diving watch Amber noticed. Not a civilian brand. Something serious with depth rating markings and a scratched crystal that spoke of actual use. We should get back. Still have 2 hours of material to cover. The afternoon session focused on nuclear submarine systems. Naomi pulled up detailed diagrams of reactor configurations, cooling systems, and emergency protocols. The information was highly technical, presented with the kind of casual confidence that made Jack, the group's designated expert on naval systems, increasingly uncomfortable. He raised his hand during a section on reactor emergency procedures. Excuse me, Blake, but some of this information seems above civilian clearance levels. The S9G reactor specifications you're showing, those are classified. Are they? Naomi didn't look up from her tablet. My mistake. Let's move on to ballast tank configurations. Wait. Jack stood up his earlier skepticism, returning with an edge of suspicion. You can't just skip past that. If you have classified information, you need proper authorization to display it. And if you don't have authorization, we need to report this. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. Connor Stevens moved toward the front of the room, his command face settling into place. This was becoming a situation. Naomi finally looked up, meeting Jack's gaze. You're absolutely right. Unauthorized disclosure of classified information is a serious offense. So, let me ask you a question. How do you know those specifications are classified? Jack blinked. Because I was briefed on reactor systems during my Naval Academy training. You were told general principles, surface-level information. What I showed you was operational detail that only people with specific clearances and need to know would recognize as classified. She gestured to the screen, now blank. So, either you have higher clearance than a lieutenant junior grade normally carries, or you're making assumptions about information you don't actually understand. The logic trap closed with surgical precision. Jack's face reddened. He'd just admitted to recognizing classified information that technically he shouldn't be able to identify as classified, which either meant he'd overstepped his own clearance at some point, or he was bluffing. That's not fair, he said. No, Naomi agreed quietly. It's not. But submarining isn't fair. The ocean doesn't care about fair, and neither does enemy radar. She advanced to the next slide, a map of global submarine operating areas. Let's talk about real-world applications. In hostile waters, your submarine is your only lifeline. The commander of that submarine is juggling navigation, enemy tracking mechanical systems, crew management, and your mission, all while staying completely silent in an environment that will kill everyone aboard if she makes a single mistake. You want to trust your life to someone who doesn't know the systems inside and out. The pronoun registered with several people. She. Naomi had said she when referring to the submarine commander. A slip maybe, or something more. Chief Foster spoke up for the first time in an hour. Ma'am, you keep talking about submarine commanders like you know them personally. Ever serve on a sub? I spent some time on submarines, yes. What was your rate? I don't think that's relevant to today's training. It's relevant to whether we should be listening to you. Foster's voice wasn't hostile, just direct. 20 years of service taught you to cut through nonsense. With respect, ma'am, you're teaching tactics and procedures that usually come from people with command experience. If you were enlisted, you'd have a different perspective. If you were an officer, you'd have rank. And if you're just a consultant who read some manuals, then we're wasting our time. The room went silent. Everyone waited for Naomi's response. This was the moment, the point where she'd either prove her credentials or reveal herself as exactly what they suspected, a well-read civilian in over her head. Naomi looked at Foster for a long moment. Then she smiled slightly, the first real smile anyone had seen from her all day. Chief, That's the smartest question anyone's asked since I walked in here. You're right that perspective matters. And you're right that I should be upfront about my background. She paused. I served on submarines for 12 years, started as an ensign, worked my way through various positions, learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, eventually moved into other work. What kind of other work? The kind I can't discuss in an open briefing room. It was a non-answer, but delivered with enough quiet authority that it felt like an answer. Foster studied her face, the calculation visible in his expression. Then he nodded slowly. Fair enough. Mason wasn't satisfied. You keep dodging questions about your actual experience. If you want us to take you seriously, maybe you should give us something concrete. Where did you serve? What submarines? When? Why does it matter? Naomi's voice remained level. Either the information I'm teaching you is valuable or it's not. My resume doesn't change that. It matters because trust is earned, Mason shot back. You're asking us to trust your knowledge, to potentially trust you with our lives and future operations. But you won't even tell us who you are. That's not how this works. The confrontation was escalating. Connor Stevens stepped forward, ready to intervene. This had gone far enough. They were behind schedule, the session was devolving into arguments, and he was starting to question why Command had sent this particular contractor. Then Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something changed in her expression. Not fear, something harder to identify. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. She picked up the phone, looked at the screen for 3 seconds, then set it face down on the podium. We need to skip ahead in the curriculum, she said. Her voice had changed, still quiet, but with a new edge. Emergency procedures, specifically reactor control and emergency surface protocols for Ohio-class submarines. Connor frowned. That's scheduled for day 3. We're not there yet. I know, but we need to cover it now. She was already pulling up new diagrams, fingers moving across the tablet with increased urgency. Lieutenant Commander Stevens, I need you to contact base operations, check on the status of USS Montana. She should be about 30 miles offshore right now, conducting routine operations. How do you know the Montana's position? Just check, please. Something in her tone made Connor pull out his radio, instead of arguing. He stepped to the side of the room, spoke quietly into the handset. 30 seconds later, his face went pale. Base operations confirms Montana is offshore. They've lost contact. Last transmission was 7 minutes ago. She reported unusual reactor readings and initiated emergency protocols. The room erupted in murmurs. Submarines didn't just lose contact. Communication redundancy was built into every system. If Montana had gone silent, something had gone seriously wrong. Naomi was already moving. She closed her briefcase, grabbed her tablet. Lieutenant Commander, I need access to your operations center, now. You don't have authorization? Then get me authorization. That submarine has 162 crew members aboard, and she's experiencing reactor control problems at operational depth. If they can't stabilize, they have maybe 40 minutes before they reach test depth and the hull fails. I can help, but only if you stop worrying about protocols and start worrying about those sailors. The authority in her voice was unmistakable now. No consultant spoke like that. No civilian gave orders to a lieutenant commander with that kind of expectation of obedience. Connor made a decision. Follow me. They moved as a group, Connor, Naomi, several senior officers, and the SEAL team. Mason and Jack exchanged glances, confusion and concern, replacing their earlier skepticism. Chief Foster moved with them, his experienced eyes noting how Naomi walked not behind Connor, but beside him, matching his pace with the unconscious coordination of someone used to command. The operations center was controlled chaos. Screens showed real-time submarine tracking data. Radio operators worked multiple frequencies trying to re-establish contact with USS Montana. Captain Raymond Ray Morrison stood at the center of it all, a 55-year-old commander with salt and pepper hair and 30 years of naval service. He turned as the group entered, started to snap at Connor for bringing unauthorized personnel, then stopped when he saw Naomi. His eyes went to her face, then down to her hands. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Then something that might have been relief. You're Blake, he said. Yes, sir. Connor said you knew something about the Montana situation. I know her systems, I know her capabilities, and I know the crew is good enough to keep her alive if someone gives them the right commands. Naomi moved to the communication station without being invited, looked at the last transmission logs. When did she report reactor fluctuations? 1432 hours. Cooling system irregularities in the port reactor. Did they scram? Negative. They were attempting to stabilize when we lost contact. Naomi's jaw tightened. They're too deep. If they scrammed at operational depth, the momentum would push them past safe limits before the backup systems could compensate. They're trying to control the dive manually. How do you know that? Because that's what I would do. She looked at the depth markers on the screen. She's at 800 feet right now, descending at approximately 15 feet per minute. At that rate, she'll reach crush depth in 41 minutes. We have recovery vessels en route. They won't arrive in time. Montana has to surface herself, and she can't do that with reactor control problems. Naomi turned to the radio operator. What emergency frequencies have you tried? Standard channels, no response. Try the backup, encrypted channel Echo 7 Whisper. She rattled off a frequency that made the operator blink in confusion. That's a secondary command channel. If the main communications are down, they'll be monitoring backup. Ma'am, that channel is restricted to... Try it. The operator looked at Captain Morrison. Morrison studied Naomi's face, some internal calculation happening behind his eyes. Then he nodded. Try it. The operator adjusted frequencies. Static filled the speakers. Then, faintly, a voice. Anyone receiving this is USS Montana, experiencing reactor control anomaly and uncontrolled descent. Attempting emergency blow, but ballast response is sluggish. Request immediate... The transmission cut out, but it was enough. The Montana was alive, and she was trying to surface. Naomi leaned over the communications console. This is... She stopped, glanced at Morrison. Sir, I need to respond, but that will require explaining who I am, and that might be complicated. How complicated? Classified level complicated. Dom Morrison's eyes narrowed. Then he made a decision that would change everything. Do it! Naomi picked up the handset. When she spoke, her voice was different, stronger, with the kind of command presence that made everyone in the room instinctively stand straighter. Montana, this is Blake. Copy, static. Then, Blake, who? This channel is restricted to. Montana, this is Commander Blake. I need to speak with your CO immediately. More static. Confused voices in the background. Then, a new voicemail strained. This is Commander Bradford. Identify yourself properly or get off this channel. Ethan, it's Naomi. I'm at Coronado Operations Center. I have your telemetry. You're at 860 feet and descending. Your port reactor cooling system has a vapor lock in the secondary loop. You tried to scram, but aborted because you're too deep. Now you're attempting emergency blow, but your ballast controls are responding slow because you've got a pressure differential in your trim tanks. Am I wrong? Silence, then quieter. Naomi, is that really you? It's really me, and I'm going to help you surface. But you need to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that? My God, we thought you were... Everyone said you'd... I know what everyone said. Right now I need you to focus. Do you trust me? Yes, ma'am. Good. First, stop the emergency blow. You're wasting compressed air on a system that can't respond fast enough. Second, redistribute your ballast, manually flood your aft tanks while maintaining bow tanks. That will angle you up and let gravity help your ascent. Third. She continued rattling off instructions with the precision of someone who had executed similar procedures 100 times. The operations center staff listened in stunned silence. This wasn't a consultant reading from a manual. This was operational expertise at the highest level. Mason stood near the back of the room, his earlier confidence completely eroded. He watched Naomi work, saw the way she moved through the submarine's systems. With intimate knowledge, heard the authority in her voice. Whatever he'd thought about her 3 hours ago had been completely wrong. Jack stood beside him, his analytical mind racing to fit the pieces together. Blake. Commander Blake. Someone who knew submarine systems better than anyone in the room. Someone who had clearance to use encrypted military channels. Someone the Montana's commander trusted implicitly. Chief Foster had moved closer, his weathered face thoughtful. He'd served with enough officers to recognize command presence when he saw it. And Naomi Blake, civilian consultant, had it in spades. On the Montana commander, Bradford was executing Naomi's instructions with desperate precision. The submarine's descent slowed. 880 feet, 890, 900. Then finally the depth gauge stabilized. "We've stopped descending," Bradford reported, his voice tight with strain. "Bow angle is holding at 5 degrees positive." "Good. Now listen carefully. Your reactor cooling system has a blockage. You can't clear it from where you are, and you can't surface at speed with the cooling compromised. You need to execute a slow-rise emergency surface. Blow ballast in controlled bursts 30 seconds at a time. Maintain bow angle between 3 and 7 degrees. This is going to take time, probably 25 minutes to reach surface, but it's the only way to keep your reactor stable during ascent." 25 minutes. Bradford's voice carried the weight of that calculation. At 900 feet depth, with reactor problems, 25 minutes was an eternity. 1,000 things could go wrong. "Understood. Initiating slow-rise emergency surface." Naomi stayed on the radio, guiding Bradford through each step. The operations center watched the depth gauge like it was a countdown to doomsday. 900 feet, 870, 840. The ascent was glacial nerve-wracking. Every minute felt like an hour. At 15 minutes, Bradford reported another problem. "Naomi, we've got vibration in the hull, port side aft section. Sounds like a pressure crack forming." "It's not a crack. It's your ballast pump struggling with the manual override. They're not designed for this kind of asymmetric operation. The vibration is normal, loud and scary, but normal." "How do you know?" "Because I've done this exact maneuver. Keep going." Mason couldn't stay quiet anymore. He turned to Chief Foster, kept his voice low. "Has she really done this? Can you emergency surface a submarine using manual ballast control?" Foster nodded slowly. "In theory, yes. In practice, it's almost impossible. The margin for error is microscopic. You need perfect understanding of the submarine's systems, the water conditions, the crew's capabilities. And you need ice-cold nerves, because if you mess up, you kill everyone aboard." He paused. "I've only heard of it being done successfully 3 times, twice in World War II, and once—" He trailed off, his eyes on Naomi. "Once when— 2 years ago, classified mission in the Arctic. A submarine surfaced through pack ice to extract a SEAL team that was compromised. The ice conditions were supposed to make surfacing impossible, but the submarine commander did it anyway. Manual control precision, ballast management, pure skill and guts. The mission was successful, but it created a diplomatic incident because the submarine technically entered Russian territorial waters." Foster's voice dropped even lower. "They never released the name of the commander, just called her the Ice Queen. Everyone figured it was political cover, that she'd been cashiered or reassigned to desk duty. Never heard what really happened to her." Mason looked at Naomi Blake, standing at the communications console with absolute focus, guiding a submarine through an impossible emergency surface. The Ice Queen. It couldn't be. Could it? 23 minutes in the Montana reached 400 feet. 25 minutes. 200 feet. At 27 minutes, she broke surface 3 miles off Coronado, her bow emerging from the Pacific, with enough force to send spray 50 feet into the air. The operations center erupted in cheers. Radio operators high-fived. Officers released breaths they had been holding for half an hour. Captain Morrison stood at the center of it, all relief and something else, respect, written across his face. Naomi set down the handset carefully. Her hands were steady. No shake, no tremor. She just guided 162 sailors through a nightmare scenario, and she looked like she'd done nothing more stressful than her regular commute. "Montana reports all crew accounted for and stable," the radio operator called out. "They're running diagnostics on the reactor system now. No injuries." Morrison crossed to where Naomi stood. He looked at her for a long moment, then held out his hand. "Commander Blake, or should I say Captain?" The room went silent again. Everyone heard it this time. Commander, Captain, not consultant, not civilian. Officer ranks. Naomi shook his hand. "Commander is fine, sir. I'm not technically on active duty anymore." "Could have fooled me." Morrison turned to the room. "For those of you who don't know, you've just watched one of the finest submarine officers in the U.S. Navy save 162 lives. Commander Blake formerly commanded USS Ohio. She has more experience in deep-water submarine operations than anyone currently serving, and if anyone still has questions about her credentials—" He looked directly at Mason. "I suggest you keep them to yourself." Mason felt his face burning. Around him, the SEAL team looked equally stunned. They had spent 3 hours mocking this woman, questioning her expertise, dismissing her knowledge. And she'd just executed a submarine rescue that most officers couldn't have pulled off with a full team and unlimited resources. She'd done it alone, with quiet competence, while they watched. Connor Stevens approached his expression carefully controlled. "Commander Blake, I owe you an apology. I should have recognized. It's fine." Naomi picked up her briefcase from where she'd set it down when entering the operations center. "You had no reason to know. That was kind of the point." "Why?" Amber Reed had pushed forward through the crowd. "Why hide who you are? Why work as a consultant instead of—" She gestured at the screens, the evidence of Naomi's capability. "You could have your pick of commands. Could I?" Naomi's smile was brief, sad. "It's complicated, Lieutenant. Command comes with complications." Jack raised his hand tentatively, all his earlier arrogance gone. "Ma'am, when you said you'd done that maneuver before the Ice Queen operation, that was you, wasn't it? The Arctic surface through pack. Ice?" Naomi didn't answer directly, just looked at him with those calm eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Then she turned back to Captain Morrison. "Sir, Montana is going to need a full reactor system, flush and inspection. The vapor lock cleared itself during ascent, but the underlying cause was probably a failing valve in the coolant loop. They should replace it before the next deployment. I'll make sure the maintenance crew knows." Morrison studied her face. "We could use you back, you know. The fleet needs officers with your skill set. He gestured at the successful rescue. "This is proof of that." "I appreciate that, sir, but I think we both know it's not that simple. It could be, if you wanted it to be." Naomi shook her head slightly. "I'm needed where I am, training people like—" She glanced at the SEAL team, "like these sailors, making sure the next generation understands what they're getting into." The explanation sounded reasonable, but everyone in the room knew there was more to the story. People with Naomi's capability didn't just step away from command. Something had happened, something that had taken the Ice Queen off the water and put her in a training facility, hiding behind civilian credentials and teaching resentful SEAL candidates who thought they knew better. Morrison didn't press, just nodded. "The offer stands. Anytime you want to come back, you let me know. I'll make the calls." "Thank you, sir." The crowd was starting to disperse. The immediate crisis had passed. Montana was safe, her crew alive, the mission accomplished. But the questions remained hanging in the air like the salt spray from the Pacific. Mason approached Naomi carefully, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like shame. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. What I said earlier in the briefing room, the way You were testing an instructor." Naomi interrupted. "That's what you're trained to do. Question authority, push boundaries, make sure the people leading you are competent." She met his eyes. "You're not wrong to do that. You're just wrong if you think appearance determines competence. You should have listened before judging, but you're young, you'll learn." She picked up her travel mug, discovered it was empty. "We still have an hour of training scheduled, unless Lieutenant Commander Stevens wants to cancel the rest of the session." Connor looked torn between relief and responsibility. "After that, I think everyone would understand if you wanted to. We have material to cover." Naomi glanced at her watch. "And I'm still being paid for a full day. Let's not waste the Navy's money." The return to the briefing room felt surreal. An hour ago, people had been laughing at Naomi Blake. Now they moved aside as she walked, gave her space, treated her with the kind of careful respect usually reserved for senior commanders. The transformation was complete and absolute, but Naomi herself seemed unchanged. She set up her tablet, pulled up her slides, and continued the briefing exactly where she'd left off: ballast tank configurations and emergency procedures. Her voice remained that same quiet register. She didn't reference the rescue, didn't gloat, didn't point out how wrong everyone had been. She just taught. Dylan raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, can I ask about the Arctic mission? The one where you—" "No." Naomi's tone was gentle but firm. "That mission is classified. And more importantly, it's not relevant to what you need to learn today. But it seems like it would be valuable to understand how you—" "What's valuable is understanding the systems and procedures that let you survive in the hostile environments. The specific missions I've run don't matter. The principles do." She advanced to the next slide. "Let's talk about under-ice navigation. When you're operating beneath ice pack, your margin for error disappears. You can't surface normally. You can't use GPS effectively. You're navigating by sonar and dead reckoning in an environment that will crush you if you make a mistake. So, you need to understand. Her phone buzzed again, the same classified number. Naomi glanced at it, and this time something shifted in her expression. Concern, maybe, or anticipation. She picked up the phone, looked at Captain Morrison, who was still present in the back of the room. "Excuse me," she said. "I need to take this." She stepped into the hallway. Through the briefing room door left, ajar, the SEAL team could hear fragments of conversation. "Yes, I saw the notification." Naomi's voice quieter, but still audible. "I understand the urgency, but I'm in the middle of..." A pause. "Arctic again? Are you certain?" Another pause longer. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. The last time..." Her voice dropped further, barely audible. "If it's that critical, then yes. But on my terms. Not like before." She returned to the briefing room 3 minutes later. Her expression was carefully controlled, but something had changed. She looked at Morrison again, some silent communication passing between them. "We need to cut this session short," she said. "Something's come up." Connor frowned. "Is everything all right?" Define all right. Naomi closed her tablet, started packing her briefcase. "There's a situation. It's classified, it's urgent, and apparently I'm one of 3 people who can help address it. Captain Morrison, I need to request emergency clearance and transportation." "Where?" "North, very far north." She paused at the door, looked back at the SEAL team. "The material we covered today, all of it, study it, practice it, understand it. Because if you ever find yourself depending on a submarine in hostile waters, your life will depend on whether you paid attention." Mason stood. "Ma'am, wait. We never finished. You never told us about what? About you, your service. Why you're here instead of commanding a submarine. What happened in the Arctic that's not your concern, Hammer." The use of his nickname stopped Mason cold. She'd been paying attention even when she seemed to be ignoring their mockery. "Your concern is becoming good enough at your job that you never have to find out what happens when everything goes wrong at 800 feet depth with no way home." She left, just like that. Walked out of the briefing room, out of the training facility, into a waiting vehicle that Morrison had apparently summoned with a quick phone call. The SEAL team watched through the windows as the vehicle disappeared toward the airfield. Chief Foster broke the silence. "Well, that was educational." Dylan laughed high and slightly hysterical. "Educational? We just spent 3 hours mocking possibly the most qualified submarine officer in the U.S. Navy. That wasn't educational. That was humiliating." "Good," Foster said. "Humiliation teaches you humility, and humility keeps you alive." He looked at the younger SEALs. "Remember this feeling. Remember what you assumed about that woman based on how she looked, how she talked, what she was wearing. Then remember how wrong you were, because someday in combat, you're going to meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations. And if you judge them the way you judge Commander Blake, you'll end up dead." The lesson landed. Hard. Mason sat back down heavily, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Jack was already pulling up information on his phone, searching for any details he could find about Commander Naomi Blake and the classified Arctic mission. He found almost nothing, just references to an incident 2 years ago, diplomatic complaints from Russia, and a notation that the submarine commander involved had been reassigned. Reassigned, not cashiered, not dismissed, just reassigned to a training facility where she could continue serving while staying out of the spotlight. Amber Reed remained in her seat after the others had filed out. She was thinking about the phone call Naomi had taken, the way she'd said Arctic again with that particular tone, like she was being pulled back into something she'd deliberately walked away from. Lieutenant Junior Grade Blake Turner approached her. "You look concerned." "I am concerned. That phone call, did you hear what she said?" "Some of it. Sounded like she's being recalled for something. Something classified, something Arctic related. Something that apparently only 3 people can handle." Amber looked at Blake. "You've worked submarine liaison. What kind of situations require that level of specificity?" Blake considered. "Recovery operations, salvage, deep water rescue in hostile territory, under ice navigation in crisis conditions." He paused. "Or pursuit. If there's a submarine in Arctic waters that needs to be tracked or intercepted, and the normal channels can't do it, you'd want someone with specialized experience. Someone like the Ice Queen, exactly like her. They both looked toward the airfield, where Naomi Blake's transport was probably already taxiing for takeoff. Whatever she was being pulled into it was serious enough to override her apparent desire to stay away from active submarine operations. Serious enough that someone with enough authority to use classified phone channels had called her twice in one afternoon. And serious enough that she'd agreed to go despite whatever reservations she clearly had about returning to that world. In the operations center, Captain Morrison was on a secured line with Naval Intelligence. Commander Grace Hayes had finally sent back the background check he'd requested hours ago on Naomi Blake. The file was extensive. 12 years of submarine service, multiple commendations, expert qualifications in deep water operations, Arctic navigation, and crisis management. Youngest female officer to command a nuclear submarine. Perfect service record. Until 2 years ago. The Arctic incident was heavily redacted in the official files, but the summary was clear enough. Commander Blake had been commanding USS Ohio on a classified SEAL extraction mission in Arctic waters. The operation had gone sideways when Russian vessels appeared in the area. The SEAL team was compromised, trapped on ice with no obvious exit. Protocol said, abort, that the risk to the submarine was too great. Naomi Blake had ignored protocol. She'd navigated the Ohio under pack ice using manual controls and dead reckoning because sonar was compromised by the ice. She'd found the SEAL team's position, surfaced through 3 meters of ice using emergency ballast procedures that should have been impossible. She'd recovered the team, then executed an emergency dive and escaped before Russian forces could respond. The mission was a success. All SEALs recovered, 0 casualties. The Ohio escaped without damage. But the political fallout was severe. Russian government filed official complaints, claimed U.S. submarine had violated territorial waters, executed hostile maneuvers, risked international incident. The Navy had to choose between defending Blake's actions and maintaining diplomatic relations. They chose diplomacy. Blake was reassigned, not punished. Her actions had saved American lives, but removed from active command, given a training position where she could continue serving without being in the spotlight, a compromise that satisfied no one and honored no one. Morrison read the file twice, then closed it. He understood now why Naomi Blake taught SEAL candidates while hiding her credentials. She'd been sacrificed for politics, and she was still serving despite it. And now someone needed her badly enough to pull her back into the world she'd been forced to leave. He picked up his phone, made another call, this one to the office of the Chief of Naval Operations. Whatever mission they were sending Blake on, she deserved backup, protection, recognition. The conversation was brief. The response was not what Morrison wanted to hear. The mission is classified above your clearance level, Captain. Commander Blake volunteered. She knows the risks, and she's the only person with the specific skill set required. Leave it alone. Morrison hung up feeling uneasy. Something about this didn't sit right. But he was a captain, not an admiral. He had his orders. And he had to trust that people higher up the chain knew what they were doing, even if history suggested they often didn't. The C-40 transport lifted off from Coronado at 1700 hours, carrying Naomi Blake and a small team of support personnel toward a destination that wouldn't be revealed until they were airborne. Naomi sat in the forward cabin, staring out the window at the Pacific receding below, thinking about submarines and ice and decisions that seemed right in the moment but haunted you forever. Her phone buzzed one more time. She looked at the message. Coordinates attached. USS Seawolf reported anomalous sonar contact. Arctic Circle under ice. Possible hostile submarine. Your wheels up in 3 hours. Welcome back to the game, Ice Queen. Naomi closed her eyes, took a slow breath, then opened her eyes and started reviewing the mission brief, the game. As if this was entertainment, as if people's lives weren't hanging in the balance, dependent on her making the right calls in conditions that turned mistakes into coffins. But she'd said yes, because someone had to, and because she was the only one who could. The transport banked north, climbing toward cruising altitude, carrying Naomi Blake back toward the Arctic ice and the frozen darkness where submarines hunted each other in absolute silence, and every decision was life or death. Back where she'd sworn she'd never go again. Back to the only place where she'd ever truly belonged. The Arctic Circle looked exactly as Naomi remembered, endless white, punctuated by pressure ridges, the ice groaning under its own weight, and beneath it all the black water, where submarines moved like predators in absolute darkness. She stood in the command center of Forward Operating Base, Thule, Greenland, surrounded by screens showing sonar data, ice thickness measurements, and the last known position of USS Seawolf. 48 hours had passed since she left Coronado. 48 hours of briefings, classified updates, and the growing certainty that this mission was going to force her to confront every decision she'd made 2 years ago. Commander Grace Hayes stood beside her, the naval intelligence officer who'd originally cleared Naomi for the Arctic operations that had ended her command career. Grace was 40, sharp-eyed, and one of the few people who knew the complete story of what had happened during that classified SEAL extraction. The Seawolf picked up the contact 72 hours ago, Grace said, pointing to the sonar display. Submarine signature definitely not ours, moving under the ice pack at bearing 345 depth, approximately 600 feet. When Seawolf moved to intercept, the contact went silent. Completely silent. No engine noise, no cavitation, nothing. Russian, Naomi studied the data. That's the problem. The signature doesn't match anything in our database. It's too quiet for their Akula class. Too maneuverable for their Yasin class, and it's operating in an area where Russian subs shouldn't be right along the boundary of international waters and our Arctic research zone. Naomi traced the contact's last known course on the screen. They're mapping the underwater terrain, looking for navigation routes through the ice. That's our assessment too, but here's where it gets complicated. Grace pulled up a new display satellite imagery of the ice pack. 3 days ago, a joint research station reported unusual seismic activity in this sector, not natural, mechanical, like someone was testing underwater demolition charges or clearing obstacles. Clearing a path. Exactly. If a foreign submarine is establishing navigation corridors through Arctic ice, that changes the entire strategic balance. They could move attack subs into positions we thought were inaccessible. They could threaten our northern installations without warning. But as Naomi turned away from the screens, looked at Grace directly. Why am I here? You've got submarine commanders with Arctic experience. The Seawolf crew knows these waters. Why pull me out of retirement? Because the Seawolf tried to track that contact and nearly got crushed. The ice conditions are extreme, 3 meters thick, in places pressure ridges forming without warning. Their commander is good, but he doesn't have experience with under-ice pursuit in these conditions. He doesn't know how to think like someone who's willing to take impossible risks. Grace paused. You do. You proved that 2 years ago. The elephant in the room finally acknowledged. Naomi had known this was coming, had known since that first phone call in Coronado, that someone would eventually mention the incident that had defined and destroyed her career. What happened 2 years ago was different, Naomi said quietly. That was a rescue operation. This is pursuit and potential engagement. The risk calculus changes when you're hunting instead of saving. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, both situations require someone willing to navigate impossible conditions and make decisions that conventional wisdom says are suicide. Grace softened her tone. Naomi, you're the best there is at this. Everyone knows it. That's why they buried you in a training facility instead of giving you another command, because if they promoted you, they'd have to admit they were wrong to reassign you in the first place. Before Naomi could respond, the communications officer called out. Commander Hayes, we've got an incoming transmission from USS Seawolf. They've reacquired the contact. Everyone moved to the communications station. The voice on the speaker was tense, controlled. Commander Ethan Frost Bradford, the same officer Naomi had talked through his emergency surface just 2 days ago. The coincidence wasn't lost on anyone. Thule Base, this is Seawolf. Contact bearing 030, depth 580 feet, speed approximately 8 knots. We're tracking at safe distance, but conditions are deteriorating. Ice thickness is increasing, and we're approaching a pressure zone. Request guidance on pursuit parameters. Grace looked at Naomi. Your call. Naomi picked up the handset. Seawolf, this is Blake. Do you have positive identification on the contacts class? Negative. Acoustic signature is inconsistent. Best guess is modified Yasin class with some kind of advanced sound dampening, but that's speculation. What's your ice clearance above you? 50 feet minimum, decreasing to 30 feet in the pressure zone ahead. 30 feet. In submarine operations, that was nothing, barely enough room to maneuver if something went wrong. If the ice shifted, if pressure ridges formed, if the contact made a sudden move, the Seawolf could find itself trapped between the ocean floor and the ice ceiling, with nowhere to go. By frost, you need to maintain minimum 100 feet ice clearance. Do not pursue into the pressure zone. Repeat, do not pursue. Blake, if we break off now, we lose the contact. This might be our only chance to... If you pursue into that pressure zone and the ice shifts, you'll lose more than the contact. You'll lose your submarine and your crew. Fall back to safe depth and maintain tracking at maximum sonar range. Silence on the line. Then reluctantly, understood. Seawolf is breaking off pursuit. Naomi set down the handset and found herself facing a room full of skeptical faces. A Navy captain she didn't recognize. Captain Owen Clark, the base commander, stepped forward. Commander Blake, with respect, that contact is why we brought you here. If we let it slip away... It won't slip away, Naomi interrupted. That submarine is mapping corridors. It needs to complete its survey, which means it will come back through this sector within 48 hours. And when it does, we'll be waiting in a position where we can track it without risking our assets. How can you be certain? Because I've run mapping operations in Arctic waters. The patterns are predictable. You have to cover the same ground multiple times to verify your data. That contact isn't running, it's working. And patient hunters catch more prey than aggressive ones. Captain Clark looked like he wanted to argue, but Grace intervened. Captain Commander Blake has more experience in under-ice operations than anyone currently serving. I recommend we follow her guidance. The tension held for another moment. Then Clark nodded curtly. Fine. But if we lose this opportunity, it's on your recommendation, Commander Hayes. He left the command center, taking several officers with him. The room felt larger, less crowded. Naomi exhaled slowly, the weight of command decisions settling back onto shoulders that had been free of them for 2 years. Grace moved closer, voice low. You made the right call. Clark's a surface warfare officer. He doesn't understand submarines. He understands politics. If that contact disappears and someone decides to blame us, there will be consequences. Let me worry about the politics. You worry about catching that submarine. Grace pulled up a chair. Now tell me what you're really thinking. Because I know you well enough to recognize when you're holding something back. Naomi sat down, suddenly tired. The last 48 hours were catching up with her. The flight, the briefings, the accumulated stress of stepping back into a world she'd tried to leave behind. That contact's movements, they're too deliberate, too methodical. Whoever's commanding that submarine isn't just mapping terrain. They're testing us, seeing how we respond, measuring our capabilities. You think they know we're tracking them? I think they're counting on it. This whole operation feels like reconnaissance, not just of the ice, but of us. They want to know how far we'll pursue, what risks we'll take, how aggressive our responses are. Grace processed that. If you're right, then breaking off pursuit might have been exactly what they wanted. Confirmation that we won't risk our submarines in extreme conditions. Maybe, or maybe it buys us time to set a better trap. Naomi pulled up the ice charts again, studied the formations. There's a Polinia, an open water area about 20 miles northeast of the contact's last position. If they're completing their mapping survey, they'll need to transit past it. We can position the Seawolf there where the ice clearance is better, and we have more room to maneuver. That assumes they follow the route you're predicting. It's not prediction, it's geometry. They've already mapped the southern approach and the eastern corridor. The Polinia is the only route north that doesn't take them through impossible ice conditions. Naomi marked the position on the display. We put Seawolf here in waiting, silent running, minimal power. When the contact passes, we track from behind, patient, quiet, never close enough to spook them. Eventually, they'll lead us to wherever they're operating from. It was a solid plan, conservative, patient, and with much lower risk than the aggressive pursuit Captain Clark had seemed to prefer. Grace approved it immediately, and within an hour the Seawolf was repositioning. Financial security isn't just about having money. It's about having options when unexpected challenges arise. Whether you're planning for retirement, protecting your family's future, or ensuring you're covered during life's uncertain moments. Comprehensive financial planning and insurance solutions provide the foundation for long-term stability. Smart professionals understand that the right coverage today prevents catastrophic losses tomorrow. Don't wait for crisis to highlight what's missing in your financial protection strategy. The waiting was harder than the action. Naomi spent the next 30 hours in the command center monitoring sonar feeds, reviewing ice conditions, and trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. She slept in 4-hour blocks on a cot in the adjacent room, showered in the base facilities, and lived on coffee and military rations that tasted exactly the same as they had during her active duty years. Grace brought her a fresh mug at 0400 hours on the second day. Seawolf reports no contact yet, but ice conditions are stable and they are positioned perfectly. Good. Naomi accepted the coffee gratefully. How long before command starts questioning the strategy? Clark's already questioning it. I've got messages from 3 different admirals asking for status updates. Everyone wants results. Everyone wants results immediately without risk and with perfect outcomes. That's not how submarine operations work. I know that. You know that. But the people making decisions from Washington offices don't always remember what it's like in the field. Grace sat down beside her. There's something else. I've been reviewing your service record, the official one and the classified addendum. Naomi stiffened slightly. Why? Because I wanted to understand what really happened 2 years ago. The full story, not the sanitized version they put in reports. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. You saved 12 SEALs that night, executed a maneuver that 3 different submarine commanders said was impossible. You did everything right, and they punished you for it. They didn't punish me, they reassigned me. Because Russia complained, because politicians needed a scapegoat, because it was easier to quietly sideline you than to defend your actions publicly. Grace met Naomi's eyes. That was wrong. Everyone in the submarine community knows it. And I think part of why you're here now is because someone's trying to make it right, giving you a chance to prove again that you're the best there is. Or setting me up to fail publicly this time. That's possible too. Grace didn't sugarcoat it. Which is why you need to be careful. Clark doesn't trust you. Half the officers here think you're a has-been who got lucky once and rode that reputation into a cushy civilian job. They're waiting for you to make a mistake. Then I won't make one. At 07:15 hours, the waiting ended. The Seawolf sonar operator picked up the contact, transiting past the Polinia exactly as Naomi had predicted. The submarine was moving slowly, methodically, still conducting its survey. The Seawolf fell in behind at maximum tracking range, maintaining perfect silence. For 6 hours they followed. The contact continued its route mapping underwater features, occasionally stopping to deploy what were probably autonomous survey drones. The Seawolf shadowed every move, gathering acoustic data, building a profile of the mysterious submarine. Then, at 1300 hours, everything changed. Contact is altering course, the Seawolf reported, bearing now 350, increasing speed to 12 knots. They're heading toward the pressure ridge zone we were tracking yesterday. Naomi was on her feet immediately. They know you're there. How we've maintained perfect silence. Doesn't matter how. Maybe they picked up something on passive sonar. Maybe they've got sensors we don't know about. The point is, they've made you, and now they're running toward the worst ice conditions in the sector. She grabbed the handset. Frost, do not pursue. Repeat, do not follow them into the pressure ridge zone. Before we continue with this intense underwater chase, can we just acknowledge how incredible it is that Naomi predicted exactly where that submarine would appear? The woman who spent 3 hours being mocked by Navy SEALs is now outthinking enemy submarine commanders in Arctic waters. This story is about to reach its peak the moment when everything Naomi has been hiding finally comes to light. You absolutely don't want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button now because the next few minutes will blow your mind. Blake, if we don't pursue, we lose them again. This might be our only chance. If you pursue into those pressure ridges, you're playing their game. They're drawing you into a trap. I can handle it. Frost, listen to me. But Commander Bradford had already made his decision. Seawolf is pursuing. We've trained for this. I know what I'm doing. The tension in Thul's command center was suffocating. Everyone watched the tracking displays as the 2 submarines moved deeper into the pressure ridge zone. Ice thickness above the Seawolf decreased 80 feet, 60 feet, 40 feet. The safety margins were evaporating. "This is bad," Grace muttered. "He's too aggressive." "He's scared of losing the contact." Naomi's hands gripped the edge of the console. "And he's proving he's not afraid." Classic mistake letting pride override judgment. On the sonar display, the contact made another turn, heading directly toward a narrow corridor between two massive pressure ridges. The Seawolf followed, committed now to the pursuit. Then the ice moved. "Seawolf reports sudden pressure shift," the communications officer called out, voice rising. "Ice ridge forming above them, clearance dropping rapidly, 30 feet, 25 feet. Emergency ascent," Naomi shouted into the handset. "Frost emergency ascent now. Negative, we're committed to the corridor. If we ascend, we'll hit the ice. We have to go forward." "There is no forward. That corridor is closing. You need to blow ballast and punch through the ice before." A horrible grinding sound came through the speakers. Metal on ice. The Seawolf had made contact with the forming pressure ridge above it. Not catastrophic, not yet, but enough to damage the sail and potentially compromise the hull integrity. "Seawolf is stuck." Bradford's voice was tight with controlled panic. "We're wedged between the ice and a rock formation. Can't move forward or back. Ice pressure is increasing. Hull stress at 60% of maximum tolerance." The command center erupted in controlled chaos. Officers shouted orders, pulled up schematics, calculated options. Captain Clark was red-faced, demanding explanations. Grace was on multiple phones simultaneously calling for backup resources that wouldn't arrive for hours. And Naomi stood perfectly still, her mind racing through scenarios and probabilities and the cold mathematics of submarine rescue in Arctic waters. "How long until the hull fails?" she asked, voice cutting through the noise. "Seawolf estimates 18 minutes at current pressure increase rate." 18 minutes. Not enough time for any nearby assets to respond. Not enough time to call in specialized rescue equipment. Not enough time for anything except the one solution that everyone in the room was thinking about, but nobody wanted to say. Naomi looked at Grace. "I need a submarine, now. The nearest asset is USS Hartford, 200 miles south. They can't possibly, not Hartford. There's a research submarine docked here at Thule, the Deep Explorer, civilian vessel but rated for Arctic operations. I saw it when I arrived." "That's a research sub. It's not designed for rescue operations. It's designed to operate under ice at depth. That's all I need." Naomi was already moving toward the door. "Get me authorization to take it out, and get me a pilot who knows these waters." "Naomi, wait, you can't seriously be considering. Seawolf has 137 crew members who are going to die in 16 minutes unless someone does something impossible. I've done impossible before. I can do it again." She didn't wait for approval, just headed for the submarine pens, her mind already calculating approach, vectors and pressure distributions, and the narrow margin between rescue and suicide. Behind her, she heard Grace on the radio, pushing through authorization protocols and finding her a pilot. The Deep Explorer was smaller than a military submarine, only 60 feet long, designed for a crew of 6. But it had advanced navigation systems and was built to withstand the pressures of deep Arctic water. The pilot Grace had found was a Norwegian civilian contractor named Erik Halvorsen, 50 years old, weathered face, and the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent decades in dangerous waters. "You want to navigate under pressure ridges to reach a stuck military submarine," Erik said as Naomi climbed aboard. "This is insane." "Probably." Naomi moved to the control station, familiarizing herself with the layout. Different from military vessels, but the principles were the same. "Can you get us there?" "I can get us there. Getting us back is a different question. One problem at a time." They submerged at 13:22 hours, 14 minutes until the Seawolf's hull failed. Naomi took the navigation station while Erik handled piloting. The ice closed above them like a tomb, and they descended into the black water, where submarines died in silence. Seawolf's position is bearing 045, distance 4,000 meters. Naomi reported reading the sonar display. "Ice conditions between us and them are severe. We need to find a corridor." "There." Erik pointed to a narrow gap in the sonar imaging. "That passage looks stable, but it's tight, maybe 10 meters clearance." "Take it." They moved through the darkness, guided only by sonar and Erik's decades of experience reading ice formations. The pressure ridges loomed above them like frozen mountains, their weight sufficient to crush the deep explorer like a tin can if the ice shifted. But they kept moving, kept pushing forward, because the alternative was unthinkable. At 13:30 hours, they reached the Seawolf. The massive submarine was wedged at a 45-degree angle between a rock outcrop and a pressure ridge that had formed directly above it. The ice was still shifting, still increasing pressure. Hull stress was now at 75%. "How do we get them out?" Eric asked. "We don't. They have to get themselves out." Naomi opened a communication channel to the Seawolf. "Hi Frost, this is Blake. I'm here in a civilian research sub. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." "Blake, how did you never mind? We're trapped. The ice pressure is increasing, and we can't move forward or backward without—" "I know, which is why you're not going to move forward or backward. You're going to blow your ballast tanks and punch straight up through the ice." Silence. Then, "That ice is 3 meters thick. We don't have enough compressed air to punch through that kind of—" "You're not punching through 3 meters. You're punching through the weakest point in the pressure ridge right above your sail, where the ice has been stressed by the same pressure that's crushing you. The ice there is already fractured. It just needs one more push. Even if that works, the emergency blow will use all our compressed air. We won't have enough left to control our ascent. We could surface so fast that—" "You'll surface fast, but controlled. I'll be underneath you with the deep explorer using my ballast to slow your ascent. Between your blow and my counterweight, we'll manage the speed." More silence. Naomi could almost hear Bradford calculating probabilities. This was the same kind of impossible maneuver she'd executed 2 years ago, the kind that saved lives but could just as easily kill everyone involved. "Do you trust me, Frost? I trusted you 3 days ago when you saved the Montana. I trusted you 2 years ago when everyone said the Arctic mission was your fault." Bradford's voice was steady now, decision made. "I trust you now. Tell me when." Naomi checked her positioning. The deep explorer was directly beneath the Seawolf ballast tanks, ready to flood on command. Eric watched her with those calm eyes, waiting. "On my mark," Naomi said. 3, 2, 1, mark. The Seawolf blew its ballast tanks. The sound was like a thunderclap, underwater compressed air, exploding into ballast chambers, forcing water out, generating massive buoyancy. The submarine lurched upward, its sail driving into the fractured ice above. Metal shrieked. Ice cracked. The pressure ridge, already stressed beyond its structural limits, shattered. The Seawolf punched through. But she was rising too fast, exactly as Bradford had feared. The emergency blow had generated so much buoyancy that the submarine was rocketing toward the surface. At this rate, she'd breach like a whale, potentially rolling, potentially suffering catastrophic damage from the violent emergence. Naomi flooded the Deep Explorer's ballast tank, simultaneously adding weight, creating drag. The small research submarine groaned under the strain as it tried to slow a vessel 40 times its size. Eric fought the controls, managing the impossible physics of the situation. The Seawolf's ascent slowed. Not much, but enough. Instead of an explosive breach, she surfaced with forceful but controlled momentum, breaking through remaining ice at an angle that kept her stable. The Deep Explorer followed, breaching into the Arctic air seconds later. Naomi and Eric surfaced into a landscape of ice and spray, and the massive bulk of USS Seawolf, sitting at a sharp angle, damaged but alive, her crew already emerging from emergency hatches onto the ice. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind and the creaking of ice adjusting to the new intrusion. Then the radio crackled. "Blake, this is Bradford. All hands accounted for. Hull integrity is compromised but stable. We're alive." A pause. "Thank you." Naomi leaned back in her seat, suddenly aware of how hard her heart was pounding. They'd done it. Against all probability, against all sanity, they'd pulled off another impossible rescue. Eric looked at her with something like awe. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I've been doing this for 30 years. "Welcome to submarine operations," Naomi said. "We're crazy as just Tuesday." But there was no time to celebrate. They'd saved the Seawolf, but they were now stranded on Arctic ice in hostile territory, with a damaged submarine that couldn't dive a research vessel, with limited capabilities and no immediate extraction options. And somewhere out there, the mysterious contact submarine had just watched the entire rescue operation. had seen exactly what the U.S. Navy was willing to risk, what capabilities they had, and who was commanding their forces. Naomi climbed out of the Deep Explorer onto the ice, breathing Arctic air that burned her lungs. Around her, Seawolf crew members were setting up emergency shelters and assessing damage. Commander Bradford approached his face, showing the strain of the last hour, but his bearing still military straight. "Commander Blake," he saluted. "On behalf of my crew, I owe you our lives. Again. Save the gratitude until we're actually safe frost. We're still 20 miles from Thule, sitting on unstable ice, and that contact submarine knows exactly where we are. They won't engage, not with an obvious rescue operation in progress. That would be an act of war. Would it?" Naomi looked at the horizon where open water met ice. "Or would it be an accident, a rescue operation gone wrong in dangerous conditions? How would anyone prove otherwise?" Bradford's expression darkened as he considered that possibility. Before he could respond, one of his sonar operators called out from inside the Seawolf's emergency hatch. "Sir, picking up submerged contact bearing 270, range 6,000 meters. It's the same signature. They're back." Everyone froze. The mysterious submarine had returned, and they were trapped, unable to dive, unable to run, sitting exposed on the ice while their stalker circled below. Naomi moved to the Seawolf's hatch, climbed down to where the sonar station was still partially operational. She studied the signature, the movement pattern. The contact was maintaining distance, not approaching aggressively. Watching, evaluating, waiting. But waiting for what? The answer came 5 minutes later, when Captain Clark's voice crackled over the radio from Thule. "Blake, we've got a situation. Satellite imagery shows Russian icebreaker Arctica changing course toward your position. They're claiming they're responding to distress signals and offering humanitarian assistance." "Like hell they are," Bradford muttered. But Naomi was thinking through the implications. The Russian icebreaker wasn't there for humanitarian reasons. It was there because the submarine below them had called for backup. This entire operation, the mapping, the pursuit, the trap, had been designed to force exactly this situation. U.S. submarines stranded on ice, unable to move, requiring rescue. And Russian forces conveniently close enough to assist, which would give them perfect justification to be in this sector, to claim humanitarian operations as cover for establishing permanent presence, to challenge U.S. claims to these waters by demonstrating they could provide assistance when America couldn't. It was brilliant, strategic, and exactly the kind of calculated provocation that could escalate into something much larger if mishandled. "How long until the icebreaker arrives?" Naomi asked. 4 hours, Clark replied. "We're scrambling assets, but nothing will reach you before the Russians. If they arrive first and claim salvage rights to assist the Seawolf, they won't get the chance." Naomi was already calculating. "Frost, can your crew patch the hull breach?" Bradford looked doubtful. "We can seal it temporarily, but it won't hold a depth. We can't dive safely." "You don't need to dive deep. Just get below the ice. 20 feet, 30 feet enough to navigate under the pack ice back toward Thule. The ice will cover your movement, and the Russians can't follow with an icebreaker." "That's insane. One wrong move, and the patch fails, and we sink like a stone. One wrong move if you stay here, and the Russians show up, and this turns into an international incident that makes headlines for months. Choose your risks." Bradford looked at his crew, saw the determination in their faces. They were submariners. They understood that staying on the ice was just as dangerous as diving, maybe more dangerous when politics got involved. "All right," he said. "We'll patch what we can and attempt controlled dive. But, Blake," he hesitated, then spoke what everyone was thinking. "Who the hell are you? I mean, really, everyone keeps calling you commander, but you operate like someone who's done things most submarine officers only read about in classified after-action reports." The question hung in the air. Around them, the Seawolf crew had stopped working, listening. Eric had climbed down from the Deep Explorer, curious. Even the radio operators at Thule had gone silent, waiting for the answer. Naomi took a slow breath. She'd spent 2 years hiding, 2 years operating in the shadows, 2 years being the civilian consultant that nobody took seriously. But here on the Arctic ice, with lives hanging in the balance, the truth was going to come out anyway. "My name is Commander Naomi Blake," she said quietly. "I was the commanding officer of USS Ohio from 2017 to 2022. I specialized in Arctic under ice operations and deep water navigation. 2 years ago, I executed a classified SEAL extraction in these same waters, surfaced through pack ice under impossible conditions to recover a team that had been compromised. The mission was successful. 12 SEALs came home alive, but the operation occurred in disputed waters and created diplomatic complications. She paused, meeting Bradford's eyes. The Navy needed to smooth things over with Russia, so they quietly reassigned me to training duty. No court-martial, no official reprimand, just a career-ending lateral move and instructions to keep a low profile. I've been teaching SEAL candidates about submarine operations while hiding the fact that I'm probably the most experienced under-ice commander alive. A slight bitter smile. Right up until 3 days ago, when the Montana crisis forced me to break cover. The revelation settled over the group like snow. Bradford stared at her, putting pieces together. The Ice Queen. The stories we've heard about the commander who pulled off the impossible Arctic extraction, that was you. That was me. And you've just been teaching classes while everyone thinks you're some civilian contractor. Politics is politics. I serve where I'm needed, even if where I'm needed is a briefing room with SEAL candidates who think I'm wasting their time. She gestured to the Seawolf. But right now, I'm needed here. So let's stop talking about my past and start focusing on getting your crew to safety before the Russians arrive. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, almost simultaneously, several crew members straightened to attention. It wasn't a formal salute. They were in a crisis situation where military protocols took a back seat to survival. But the gesture of respect was unmistakable. Bradford nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. Let's get to work. The next 3 hours were a blur of improvised engineering and calculated risks. The Seawolf crew patched the hull breach with emergency seals and prayer. Naomi worked with Eric to map a safe route under the ice back toward Thule, finding corridors with sufficient clearance for the damaged submarine. And all the while, the mysterious contact submarine circled below, watching, waiting, perhaps reporting back to the approaching icebreaker. At 16:45 hours, with the Russian icebreaker still an hour away, the Seawolf was ready to attempt diving. The crew sealed emergency hatches, powered up what systems they could with their compromised reactor, and prepared for what might be their last dive. "This is Commander Bradford," he announced over the internal communications. "We're about to attempt controlled dive through Arctic ice with a patched hull breach. Odds are not in our favor, but we've got the Ice Queen herself guiding us home. And if she says we can do it, then I believe her. All hands stand by for dive." The Seawolf submerged slowly, carefully, ice water flooding around her damaged hull. The patch held. Barely. But it held. Naomi piloted the Deep Explorer alongside, monitoring the Seawolf's progress, calling out warnings about ice formations and pressure changes. Together, the two submarines navigated the underwater labyrinth back toward Thule base, moving through passages so narrow that the Seawolf's hull scraped ice on both sides. The mysterious contact submarine followed for a while, then broke off. Mission apparently complete. Intelligence gathered, point made. They'd tested U.S. response capabilities and found them wanting, except for one civilian consultant who'd pulled off yet another impossible rescue. By 1800 hours, both submarines reached Thule's protected harbor. The Seawolf surfaced to cheers from base personnel who'd watched the entire crisis unfold on sonar displays. Bradford's crew emerged exhausted but alive, their submarine damaged but salvageable. And Naomi Blake climbed out of the Deep Explorer into Arctic twilight, feeling 2 years of forced anonymity finally crack apart. In today's complex world, the knowledge you gain through expert education can literally save lives, or in this case, entire submarine crews. Whether you're advancing your professional skills, seeking specialized certification, or building expertise that sets you apart, investing in high-quality education and legal preparation creates opportunities that simply don't exist otherwise. The best professionals never stop learning, never stop improving, and never stop seeking the knowledge that transforms capability into mastery. Consider what expertise you need to develop for the challenges ahead. Captain Clark met her at the dock, his expression unreadable. Behind him stood Grace Hayes and a group of senior officers who'd flown in during the crisis. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next, whether Naomi would be praised or blamed, whether this would be career redemption or political disaster. Clark spoke first. "Commander Blake, that was either the most brilliant submarine operation I've ever witnessed or the most reckless." "Sometimes those are the same things, sir." "Indeed." Clark's stern expression cracked slightly. 137 crew members are alive because of your actions today. The Seawolf is damaged but recoverable, and we managed to avoid an international incident with Russia by getting our people out before they could claim salvage rights. He paused. But you violated about a dozen protocols, took unauthorized control of a civilian submarine, and executed maneuvers that 3 different safety regulations specifically prohibit. Yes, sir. Which is exactly what you did 2 years ago. Saved lives by breaking rules that were designed to prevent exactly the kind of risks you took. Clark studied her face. The difference is this time, there's no political pressure to bury it. This time, everyone saw what you did. And this time, the entire submarine community is going to know that the Ice Queen is back. Grace stepped forward. Captain, I have authorization from Naval Operations Command. They've reviewed the situation and made a determination. Here it came. Naomi kept her expression neutral, prepared for whatever judgment was about to land. Reinstatement, reprimand, formal recognition, or formal censure. Grace handed her an official document. Effective immediately, Commander Naomi Blake is restored to active duty status with full rank and privileges. You're being assigned to a new position, Arctic Operations Specialist, reporting directly to the Chief of Naval Operations. Your mandate is to develop protocols for extreme condition submarine operations and to serve as primary consultant for any Arctic crisis requiring specialized expertise. Naomi stared at the document, not quite believing it. They're bringing me back. They never should have pushed you out. Grace's voice was firm. Everyone knew it, but it took 2 more impossible rescues to make them admit it publicly. Around them, the crowd erupted in applause. Bradford and his crew, Eric and the civilian support staff officers and enlisted personnel who'd watched Naomi prove herself twice in 3 days. The recognition was overwhelming, validating, and somehow inadequate to capture the complexity of what she was feeling. 2 years. 2 years of teaching classes to people who didn't respect her. 2 years of hiding her expertise and pretending she was satisfied with desk work. 2 years of wondering if she'd ever get another chance to do what she was genuinely good at. And now, standing on Arctic ice with salt water freezing in her hair and exhaustion dragging at her bones, she was finally being acknowledged for exactly who and what she was. The best submarine commander in the U.S. Navy. The Ice Queen. The woman who did impossible things because someone had to. We've just witnessed one of the most incredible turnarounds in military history. The woman who was mocked and dismissed is now being reinstated as an elite Arctic operations specialist, the exact position her skills always deserved. But here's the thing about Naomi Blake. She doesn't do this for recognition. She does it because when lives are on the line, she's the only one who can. This story is about respect, redemption, and the truth that real competence doesn't need to announce itself. It just saves the day when everyone else has given up. If this story moved you, if Naomi's quiet strength inspired you, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this remind us that the most capable people are often the ones no one expects. The formal ceremony happened 3 days later, back at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado. Naomi stood in her dress whites the first time she'd worn full uniform in 2 years, while Admiral Patricia Chen, commander of Pacific Submarine Forces, formally presented her restoration orders. The briefing room where she'd been mocked just days ago was packed now. Bradford and the Montana crew were there, the Seawolf team that she'd rescued, Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Amber Reed, and in the back row, the SEAL candidates who'd learned the hardest lesson of their training: never judge capability by appearance. Mason Hammer Fletcher stood at attention, his earlier arrogance completely eroded by the weight of what he'd witnessed. Jack Numbers Bradley had written a formal apology and delivered it personally. Chief Foster, the veteran who'd been first to recognize something special about Naomi, wore an expression of quiet satisfaction. Admiral Chen addressed the room. 2 years ago, the Navy made a decision that many of us questioned. We allowed politics to override operational excellence. We prioritized diplomatic convenience over the career of an exceptional officer. Today we correct that mistake. She turned to Naomi. Commander Blake, you have demonstrated extraordinary competence, courage, and commitment to your fellow sailors. Your actions have saved hundreds of lives and upheld the highest traditions of submarine service. Welcome back to active duty. Naomi accepted the orders. shook the Admiral's hand, and faced the room full of people who now knew exactly what she was capable of. She didn't give a speech, didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. But afterward, when most people had filed out, Mason approached her nervously. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize again for already forgotten," Naomi said. "You questioned an instructor's credentials. That's smart tactical thinking. You just need to remember that credentials come in many forms. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it." "I'll remember that, ma'am." Mason hesitated. "Can I ask you something? That SEAL team you extracted 2 years ago, the one that started all this, do you ever regret it, knowing what it cost your career?" Naomi considered the question seriously. 12 people went home to their families because I was willing to take a risk that seemed impossible. Would I trade their lives for my career advancement? Not for a second. The Navy can assign me wherever they want, but I can't save lives I didn't save. Those choices stay with you forever. That's a good answer, ma'am. It's the only answer." She started to leave, then turned back. "Hammer, you're going to be a fine SEAL. But remember, this being elite isn't about never failing. It's about being willing to risk failure for something that matters. Don't let pride stop you from taking necessary risks. And don't let fear stop you from recognizing when someone else has the expertise you need." She left him standing there processing that wisdom and walked out into California sunshine that felt warmer than Arctic ice, but somehow less honest. Grace caught up with her in the parking lot. "So, Arctic Operations Specialist. That's a real position, by the way, not just a made-up title. You'll have authority over all under-ice submarine protocols, direct reporting to CNO, and the ability to authorize your own missions." "Which missions?" "That's the interesting part." Grace pulled out a tablet, showed Naomi a classified report. "That submarine we tracked in the Arctic, it wasn't Russian. Intelligence finally identified the signature. It's Chinese. New class, something we've never seen before. Advanced stealth systems under ice capability, and apparently operating from a hidden base somewhere in the Arctic Circle." Naomi studied the data. China doesn't have Arctic submarine bases. They didn't, now they do. Or they're building one. And they're mapping corridors to access areas we thought were secure. Grace's expression was serious. "Your first mission as Arctic Operations Specialist is to find that base, identify their capabilities, and develop response protocols in case they decide to expand their operations. That's not a mission, that's a war game waiting to happen. Which is why you're perfect for it. You think like someone willing to take calculated risks in impossible conditions. And you've proven you can operate under pressure that would break most people." Grace smiled slightly. "Welcome back to the game, Ice Queen. Let's hope the ice doesn't crack this time." 2 weeks later, Naomi Blake stood on the deck of USS Connecticut, a Virginia-class attack submarine, equipped with the latest Arctic navigation systems, preparing for departure on a classified mission that would take her back to the frozen waters where she'd made her reputation and lost her command. But this time was different. This time, she had full authority, full recognition, full support from the Navy that had once pushed her aside. She looked at the ocean, thinking about submarines and ice and the thin line between courage and recklessness. Somewhere under that water in the frozen darkness of the Arctic Circle, a Chinese submarine base was operating in territory where it shouldn't exist, and she was going to find it. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. "Heard you're back in action. About time. If you need an experienced pilot who knows Arctic ice, I know a Norwegian who might be interested. Eric." She smiled, texted back. "I'll keep that in mind. This time, I'll try not to surface through 3 meters of ice. No promises, though." Another text, this one from Bradford. "Montana's back in service. Heard you're heading north. If you need backup, we're available. The crew hasn't forgotten what you did. We won't forget again." A third text from Grace. "CNO approved your mission parameters. You have authorization for full Arctic penetration, weapons-free if threatened, and discretionary authority over all U.S. submarine assets in theater. Translation. You're not just a consultant anymore. You're the commander. Don't screw it up. You won't." Naomi pocketed her phone, picked up her sea bag, and walked up the gangway into USS Connecticut. The watch officer saluted as she came aboard. "Welcome aboard, Commander Blake. We've been briefed on the mission. The crew is excited to have you with us." "Excited or terrified?" "Both, ma'am. We've heard the stories. The stories are exaggerated." I certainly hope not, ma'am. Because where we're going to need someone who can do the impossible. Naomi descended into the submarine, feeling the familiar pressure of the hatch closing above her, the sound of water against the hull, the hum of the reactor that would power them through darkness and ice toward whatever waited in the Arctic. She was back. Not just back in uniform, but back where she belonged, in command, in the depths, in the place where every decision mattered and hesitation meant death. The Ice Queen had returned, and this time she wasn't going to let politics or fear or anyone's expectations determine what she could do. The Connecticut cast off at 2000 hours, slipped beneath the Pacific, and turned north toward frozen waters, where nations played dangerous games with submarines and sovereignty. Somewhere ahead in the darkness beneath the ice, a Chinese base waited to be discovered. A new kind of Cold War was beginning. And Naomi Blake, the woman who had been mocked for being small and quiet and civilian, was now the tip of the spear. Behind her in Coronado, in offices and briefing rooms and submarine piers, people were learning a lesson that would reshape how the Navy viewed leadership and competence. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never dismiss someone based on appearance. Never forget that the most capable people are often the ones who don't need to prove anything until the moment when lives hang in the balance and impossible becomes necessary. The Ice Queen was back, and the Arctic would never be the same.